I begin the sermon this morning with mention of my father. He told me he read in the Globe that there was a gentleman who traveled from Boston to Vermont to take a particular photograph that he'd add to his portfolio of evidence that the earth is flat. Apparently his girlfriend jumped him. She just couldn't take it anymore. I commend him for his determination, and I commend her for her discernment. As for me, I am not collecting evidence that the earth is round. People took care of that for all of us many centuries ago. I am also certain that the earth hasn't shifted its tilt on its axis. So I paid close attention when the podcast I was listening to mentioned a place called Igloolik, which is up in the Arctic Circle, where they've actually been seeing the sun come up in a different place than it used to. Like so much so that it made people wonder if the earth had shifted somehow. The particular sunrise when the Inuit of this region noticed this change was after the long polar night. So this is the first glimpse they're getting of the sun in months, and it's something that people take special note of. There are big parties to welcome back the sun, and they know just where and when to look for that little glimmer that appears ever so briefly over the horizon. Sure enough, when the reporter on this podcast went to go celebrate and eat caribou with the people of Igloolik, the sun peaked earlier than it was supposed to and in a weird spot. Don't worry. It's not because our planet has shifted on its axis. It's actually because of an atmospheric phenomenon that happens sometimes in the polar regions when there's a very cold layer of air on the surface and a layer of warm air above. And the boundary between those two layers acts sort of like a mirror. So images of what's just over the curve of the earth reflect onto that layer of air. So they're seeing a reflection of the sun, not the sun itself. A sneak preview of the end of the long polar night. Reason enough to eat caribou, I suppose. The sun will be here soon. However arctic and dark it may feel around here lately, we don't have to go months without sunlight. All the same, we are ready for the days to get longer. We know it's coming. We've been here before. New Year's marks the fact that we've swung in a giant loop around the sun yet again. Does the Earth get tired of carving the same path in space year after year, the way we can get tired of the same old routine? Each year, New Year's Eve offers us the ideal conditions for disappointment. We're supposed to have a show-stopping party. We have to have someone to smooch at midnight. I mean, come on, it's hard to even stay awake until midnight. We're supposed to have resolutions. We're supposed to fix our lives, start fresh, somehow get everything right that we've always gotten wrong. It can be discouraging to make the same New Year's resolutions year after year, to feel like our lives are going in circles. But maybe we can glean some wisdom from the turning of the year. Maybe there's something positive to this repetition. It's not just tiresome. We can also take comfort in the circles of our lives. We know what's coming. We've been here before. We can wait in the snow and eat caribou until the sun comes up. Our problems might still be here when the long night is over, but the sun might also shine new light on them. Sometimes the light that shines to help us see our problems in a new way is not the light of the sun, but rather the light of community, when we see our situation reflected through other people's eyes. I'll tell you what I mean. I've been learning about a practice for talking and listening to one another called circles. This practice originated among the Tlingit people of the Yukon Territory, which is a ways west from the people of Igloolik. Everyone in a talking circle is invited to speak, one at a time. Often we pass an object around to mark whose turn it is, a stone, a stick, or a feather. We have a host whose job it is to convene the gathering, to make it welcoming, and to begin the conversation. The talk moves in only one direction around the circle, and when you get the talking piece, you may speak, or you may pass it along without speaking. So that's all very well and good. But what if I'm desperate to respond to something someone else said immediately, whether or not it's my turn? The structure of the circle begs me to wait and listen. instead of jumping in to offer my brilliance or my defense or whatever it is, it's hard to get used to. It pushes me to let go of the need to perfectly represent myself at all times. I have to sit with the discomfort or the eagerness to speak. I learn to trust that even if I never get to say that particular thing, express my agreement, tell that anecdote, I'm still here. I'm still part of the circle. Enough rounds around the circle, and eventually I stop rehearsing what I'm going to say in my head once I finally get the talking piece. The more we circle around, the more I get out of my own head, and the more I can hear my story reflected in everyone else's stories. I've been leading circles like this at a domestic violence shelter called Renewal House. It's a project of our UU Urban Ministry in Roxbury. Trauma, like domestic violence, can interrupt people's capacity to trust one another and is incredibly isolating. Gathering for a talking circle, as we do in the shelter, can ease that isolation. I offer conversation prompts about family or goals, or something more lighthearted like, what kind of superpower would you have? After some initial reluctance to share with one another, soon we are laughing and nodding and crying together and weaving a collective story. Circles disrupt the illusion that we are in this alone. They teach us that we have much to learn from each other. We move from separate to together, and we connect as our shared story builds around the circle. When we're not sitting in circle together, it's easy to get caught up in the mindset that all of us are supposed to live linear lives. We're supposed to be marching forward, ever productive, always improving. The seeming impossibility of New Year's resolutions would suggest that it doesn't always work that way. We don't always feel like we are getting somewhere. The cycles of nature are a powerful antidote to this pressure to progress. I used to work as a farmer, and I relied heavily on those cycles for peace of mind. When a crop failed, all was not lost because I knew all that vegetation would eventually nourish the soil as compost. Feeling overwhelmed by the frenzy of the middle of the summer, up to my elbows in tomatoes and aphids, at least I knew it would calm down in a few months. The crops would offer their last fruits, frost would come, and the fields would be quiet until the next time around. We made a few changes here and there from year to year, but basically we did the same thing each year, using the same kinds of practices that have been used for generations on small organic farms like ours. We were trying to get to know our land and to keep up the rhythms with the rhythms of the season. We didn't tire of repetition. We were glad for it because the patterns helped us learn. Just before the sermon, I shared that passage by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Tyson invites us to try on his cosmic perspective because by understanding that the universe does not even remotely revolve around us, we might attain a better sense of ourselves as earthlings. We are all spinning around on this earth together. The cosmic perspective, Tyson writes, shows the earth to be a moat. But it's a precious moat, and it's the only home we have. These days, it can feel a bit like the earth is off its axis. The people of Igloolik are right to wonder if something has shifted, because it has. In the last 50 years, they've been forced from their semi-nomadic way of life into permanent settlements and the cash economy. Levels of food insecurity, which is not knowing where your next meal might come from, in Nunavut territory, where Igloolik is located, are unbelievably high because of this change in their way of life, combined with the absurd prices of food that you can imagine in this region, which has no roads to access it. Also, the impacts of hunting ground access issues and climate change on their wild food sources, such as caribou. Lisi Patsi, a woman from Igloolik, has founded a group called Feeding My Family, which is organizing to raise awareness about these issues and to foster unity across the North, to work together, to adapt to these changes, to feed one another. There is a strong culture of sharing in these communities, and food security initiatives are building on this existing culture. This is how any of us will make it through these world-tilting crises we are facing, together. From the Arctic Circle to Renewal House and the farm, we find circles and the truths they offer us. The patterns of our lives come and go in cycles, and we are all in this together. As Black Elk said, everything the power of the world does is done in a circle. We turn and return to ourselves like the cycling seasons, the phases of the moon. But our lives move not in simple circles, for of course some things shift and change. A birth, a death, growth, loss, a new perspective. Our lives are marked by this interplay of the familiar and the new. So as we begin our journey around the sun yet again, woven through with this mix of old and new, let us pay attention to the circles that are all around us. Let us pay attention to the earth, to the sun, to the cycles of nature for the lessons they hold. Let us pay attention to each other and support one another, for none of us has to swing around this earth alone. Amen. May it be so.